see that okay? Excellent. All right. So in order to get started, Marisa and I have been speaking since I think 2014, all sorts of different industries. The Climbing Wall Association has been a great event for us. Anybody involved in the industry is in there because they love it. And there's nothing better than talking to audiences that are truly engaged, not because, well, my boss sent me, so I had to be here, but people that are passionate about the industry and, love it so much. So it's an honor for us. But to kick it off, we just want to share a quick story of a friend of ours. So what the CWA Summit is for climbing is what a conference called the HFA is for commercial fitness. And we had a friend who got accepted to speak at the HFA show, and he was really excited, and he reached out for help. He had never spoken before. He was excited. He was nervous, and he wasn't quite sure how to go about putting together a great presentation. So he reached out to both of us for help, and he said, "Can I get some advice?" And I said, I gave him probably the most epic advice that anyone has ever given a speaker in the history of speaking, and it was this. I said, "Just don't suck." And I think that actually made him feel worse and more nervous. And while I meant it, I was like, "Please do not suck." We did give him a few more tools that will help, and that's what we'll share today, are some of these things that help you master the art of powerful presentations.
All right, so basically, we're going to tell you a little bit about ourselves and why we're here sharing. And we're going to tell you why it's such an impactful practice to really think about how you craft your presentations. And then we're going to give you our three keys. And of course, we have to alliterate. So those are going to be the ways that we show you how we're going to go about crafting these. And then if there's questions along the way, we'd be happy to answer them. I know some of you are listening in a recording, but we're going to give you our email information at the end of the conference, at the end of the presentation. So make sure you reach out to us if you have any questions. So just a little bit about us. As Chris alluded to, our background is actually in commercial fitness. We owned and operated health clubs for over 20 years, and we've been working with CWA since 2017. Love what y'all do, and the industry is a little bit on the new side compared to the commercial health and fitness. So it's exciting to share some of our best practices and things we've learned with all of you. Chris has written a lot about how to run a club and how to get people onboarded and how to engage your members. But more recently, and he can tell you a little more specifically, he had a new book that he published, which is really exciting. And we've got to travel the world, and now we are the Empower Group. So we do consulting, we speak at conferences, we do on-site workshops. We were at High Point doing a workshop for their staff in Alabama, which was really fun. So we've really enjoyed that. And then along that, we also do strategic advising for gyms and health clubs.
Yeah, and by the way, congratulations for getting selected to present at this awesome event. We've been part of the selection committee, and trust us, it's hard. There are so many applications, and so many people apply. So the fact that whatever you all submitted resonated, with the committee, and was obviously great content. So congratulations, and you should be so excited to share your expertise at this amazing event. But one thing, in kind of in that vein is, people go to events for speakers, right? And they want to see the trade show. They do want to go in there and play with all the new grips and holds and toys. But one of the main things is we set the stage, right? The educational session, the speakers set the stage. We have that chance to leave a lasting impression and hopefully help people transform their businesses. For all the speaking Marisa and I have done, there's nothing we love more than getting that email that said, "Hey, I have to tell you, something really resonated and we implemented it." So remember that as speakers, it's not just about, conveying a message and hoping that when you can really craft a great presentation and get it to resonate, you really help people make a difference. And just so you know, too, like 56% of attendees rate the quality of speaker as the single most important part of any single event. So even though that's a little preaching to the choir, because that's why you all want to speak, it's important to realize that the data and statistics show that speakers matter, and they matter. They're the most important part of any single event.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we're going to share with you. We're going to talk starting with content. Like, what is it that you're going to share? What is it that you're passionate about that you want to tell attendees about? And then we're going to talk about how you craft or create that presentation. And finally, it's how you communicate. So what it is that you're going to tell people, how you put it together, and how you deliver that message. So let's start with content.
Yeah, let's start with content.
Okay, very good. So what is it? It's the message that you're conveying to people. So how you're going to share the thing that you're most passionate about. And then it's important because this is what's actually people are going to take away from what you're sharing. And for us, we have always felt both as attendees and speakers that we love to be inspired by what others are doing in the field. But more importantly, we love to take away what other speakers have shared with us and implement it in our own businesses. So for us, it's really important that we get inspired, that we get educated, and then we take action. And so that's what we want to do as speakers, is get people excited about doing that.
And one thing too is you don't get to decide if you're a good presenter. The audience does. We might like, I might walk out of a session and be like, man, I was awesome and hilarious and people learned. It was the best presentation of all time. And the survey comes back to Jake and Garnet and they're like, that was the worst session I had ever sat in, right? So it's not the presenter, but it's the attendees who decide. So the better you put together great content and organize it in a way that the attendees understand, the better the presentation is going to resonate with the participants. So keep that in mind too, because sometimes what we've seen with presenters, you get a couple different kinds. You get the really smart, data-driven presenter who doesn't put the content and everything into a organized fashion where people get it. So it's like a lot of great information, but it just doesn't stick. And then you've got the presenter who's funny and charismatic, and there's no like you're like, well, I was entertained, I think, but I didn't learn anything I could take back to my business. So the way you structure that content and when we get in how you create it and communicate it all plays into just a really well done, well-rounded presentation that resonates. So with organizing content, and by the way, everything we share today are things that we personally do when we construct presentations, but it's also considered a buffet. Take what you like and leave what you don't. You are experts in the industry. That's why you've got selected. You've got experience. So we're just hoping to add to your toolbox. But again, combine it with what you already do that's so amazing. A way we organize content is you do want to come up with some sort of introduction, right? When you're starting a presentation, and it should be tailored to your own style. But we saw a meme the other day where it said, the minute a speaker comes out and says, good morning, I can't hear you. Good morning. You're like, I'm out, right? They absolutely lose us from the start. So thinking of some sort of intro that really engages people from the start. So as a tangible example, when we present on customer service, a lot of times we will start with a story about my son when I took him when he was 6 years old on a Southwest flight and how amazing, the whole plane saying happy birthday and they took him to the flight deck and they gave stickers. It was this amazing experience. And all it was an airline. But instead of coming out and being like, hi, I'm Chris and this is Marissa, and we're the Empower Group and we're going to talk to you today. Before we even talk, we just come out and say, I click on a picture. It's a cute little 6-year-old sitting in a flight deck of a plane. And I'm like, so this is my son, Adam. And I surprised Adam for his birthday. And I just go into this story, and stories tend to captivate people, right? So then all of a sudden they're listening. They're like, what is he talking about? Right? So keep in mind, it doesn't have to be a story. Some people will start with some sort of joke or some sort of game or some sort of icebreaker. But you want to do something right out of the gate because you have, it's like probably 15 seconds for people to judge you. And they're either in or they're out, right? So get creative, something, ideally that relates to your topic, that's just not something random, but some sort of story, joke, icebreaker to start it off. Anything else on the?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we struggle with when we're so passionate and excited about what we're talking about is we have so much that we want to give and share. And so how do we put together all this information into a consumable, either 1 hour, 45, whatever the time block is? So we struggle because there's so much we want to say, but we really have to pull back and simplify. And we've seen things like, if you search, like people will tell you when you're doing an Instagram reel, for instance, that you need to have a hook. It's the same thing with a presentation. So it might be something like an alarming statistic. What if I told you that 95% of people have never even been inside a climbing gym? What would you say? So there's always like just little tricks to the trade that are easy to do. And it seems gimmicky, but the point of that is you want to reel your people in from the beginning so that when you start sharing the important stuff, they're listening.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like a shocking statistic. Because if you said that 95% of people have never been into an indoor climbing facility, your audience would be like, no way. They would look at each other and they'd go, no way. Even today, when we started this, we told you about our friend Jacob. And we were like, just don't suck. So regardless of how today goes, you'll never forget just don't suck, right? It's something memorable to grab attention. Then objectives. Now, people respond and learn better when they know the path you're going to take them on. So just like Marisa did earlier, she's like, so here's what we're going to do today. We'll give you our background. We'll talk about why this is so important. We'll take you through 3 keys to doing this. So again, it becomes predictable. People know the journey they're about to go on, so therefore they're more engaged. We've all heard the speakers who kind of seem like they're all over the place, and even if the info is great, they lose you, right? So we want to make sure that we're going some sort of catchy introduction to get people's attention, and then tell them the journey you're going to take them on. Always provide your background. This is your chance to tell them why you should be up there speaking and why they should listen to what you're doing. We always recommend putting in some personal stuff too, so it humanizes you as well and makes you more relatable. So, whether it's your expertise, your professional background, something about, and here's a picture of my family or something, just so people understand and they can really relate and they feel like they know you more as a speaker, because that's going to help build rapport and trust.
And just on a side note, some of you may feel like, that's not my style. I don't want to brag about myself, but what we want to tell you is that when you share things, you're establishing some sort of credibility. We've often been into seminars or presentations where the person is very dynamic and they just dive right into their content, and we're left wondering, like, who are you? And what's your background? Just a little segment. So don't feel like you're bragging. It's more sharing like the backstory about how you got there. So some of you I know are super humble about this, but we do want to know who you are and why you're here.
Yeah, and I think if you do feel a little like you're bragging with the expertise piece and the experience that you have in the industry, that's why when you add the little human part, that helps, again, make it more relatable. So you're not sitting there going, I am great and I'm up here and down there, just listen, right? You're saying, no, hey, I've had some great experience. I've learned some incredible things. I want to share them with you. And by the way, when I'm not climbing or working, I love snowboarding or walking my dog. Those personal things help ground it. Then from there, it's a good idea to build a case for your topic. So we did that in the beginning where we're like, here's a quote on how important speakers are, and here's the data on how important speakers are. So in a little way, it's preaching to the choir, because people choose a topic because they want to learn it, right? But at the same time, it's always good to reinforce it with data. So back to that customer experience one, we'll go through customer experience and we'll say, people will spend 70% more money on something they feel is a better experience. The lifetime value of a membership is X if they believe it's a great experience. The main reason you lose members is not competitors, it's a bad experience, and only 1 in 25 people would say. So we lay out, just a handful of data points so that everybody knows this is not theory, this is not idea, this is just how important what we're going to teach you is, and it reinforces all of that.
And anytime we're prepping for a presentation, like I believe it was last year, we did a workshop on onboarding. We just Googled, what are some statistics on employee onboarding? And it was, about most people feel like they don't get onboarded properly. Most companies don't have a segment that they consistently do. This year, I'm doing something on sales. I'm probably going to Google sales, and I have some studies that I've looked at already that show most people who work in gyms don't ask for the sale, and that results in people walking away. So there's probably going to be some data that I'm going to use to talk to people about why having a systematic process for selling a membership is important.
And to top this off, a lot of times what we've seen, whether it's indoor climbing or it's parks and recreation or commercial fitness, you get the mid-level manager who's coming to your session because they believe in it, and now you're giving them ammunition when they have to sell this to the owners to implement it. So when they go back and say, oh man, we really need to improve our new hire onboarding process because look at this data. So you're giving them the tools to then sell it as well. So, to some extent, you should build a case for why what you're going to talk about is important. Then 3 to 5 teaching points. Now, again, this is where the challenge with expertise comes in, is you're like, I got the floor for 60 minutes and I'm going to share every single thing I've learned in my entire career, but people will not remember more than 3 to 5. I will tell you honestly, we started generally early in our career with 5. I rarely go past 3. I just pick what are the 3 most important things that I want to teach to somebody. And then I'm going to tell them like what we did, the what, the why, the what is it, why is it important, and now how do you do it? Then the other part goes, you got to give examples and stories. And when you look at any research on people and the way they learn and remember, they remember stories. So, we could talk about a best practice. Like, for example, this is probably oversimplified, but one thing we did at our club when we had our health club was we printed 1 million postcards, and we told our staff, send postcards to any member for any reason, whenever you want, just make sure you send at least 2 a month. So just a member engagement sort of plan. So we talk about the postcard plan and then how we managed it. And then I'll tell the story, and this is a true story. This one guy, Mo, came in. He was an early morning guy, and he brought the postcard in. And he walked in and he walked up to Marissa and he said, "You sent me this." And she's like, "I know, I sent it." And he's like, "This is the nicest thing anyone has ever done for me. I put it on my fridge and I look at it every morning." And the first thing we thought of was, that's really sad if this is the nicest thing that's ever happened to you. You need to work on the quality of your life overall. But it was a nice moment. And that story will make sure somebody never forgets the postcard lesson, right? So whether it's a tangible example or how it increased results in your gym or anything like that. So again, what is the teaching point? Why is it important? How do you do it? And then reinforce it with stories and examples.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Hey.
Then you do want to recap at the end too, right? So at that point, you'll say, so today we talked about these 3 things and why they're so important, and you can see how that would impact everything. And then you want to bring it to a close, right? So then so if you implement what we talked about today, you're going to dramatically improve your employee engagement or your member retention or your sale, your gym sales. And then when you do close, you can decide what sort of information you want to give. We always give all of our contact info. We want people to reach out if they need anything. Oftentimes we'll offer to send the slide. You decide on that, whatever you're comfortable with, but then come up with some sort of closing.
Yeah.
So any questions yet? And by the way, what will happen is, you'll have this resource. As you're creating your presentations, you might come up against something. Please reach out. We had people do that last year. We are totally happy to give feedback and help. And it's again, it's a buffet. Some of this you'll be like, "I'm not doing that," and that's okay, right? Or, "I really like that." So
yeah. All right. So let's talk about, you have information. So
I got a question for you, Chris.
Yeah.
Sorry, you just made me think about it with throwing up that question slide like in the middle of the presentation. What do you guys think about like that balance between just lecturing, talking at people versus like interactive, getting them involved, asking them if they have questions, not at the very end, but throughout the presentation? How do you guys navigate that balance?
That's a great question. And one of the things that we work really hard to do is try to put in segments for some sort of interaction. And as you get more experienced, that if you're the very last session of the day, you're going to have to build in more of those because people have been sitting for a long time. So what I would say is, if you're confident enough in your skills to do the room, you allow people to have questions throughout because you're really good at reeling back in. We have seen speakers who are just getting started who are not great at managing, because there's always someone who's like, "One time in my gym." So think about that. And it could be that you just have, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to talk amongst yourselves about something in regards to what I just shared, and then you walk around and you're very set on time. So if you're worried about people taking over, then you can have them talk amongst themselves instead of telling their story. And that's more of a comfort level. But I do think it's a good opportunity to give people a chance to network and introduce each other and just say, turn to the person behind you and tell them one time that something that you sold in your retail shop did really well, and share that story. And then go to the person on the other side of you and do the same thing, because it is good for people to interact instead of just sit. So great question.
Yes, to add to that, that's something that now I think next time we do this presentation, we'll make sure we put the interactive piece as one of the teaching parts, because that's a great question. But so for us, the interaction are these 3 question blocks in between each of the teaching ones. Sometimes we'll do it as like a take action or create a to-do list, and we'll stop after a section and we'll say, all right, write down 2 or 3 things that you just learned in this section and that you think you can implement right away, and then share it with the person next to you. But as you do it, you're right, great presenters create interactions, and we always look at it as 2 types. One are sort of Q&A interactions. So for example, earlier I mentioned with customer experience, 70% of people will spend more money if they feel like something's a superior experience. So at that point in time, without a formal activity, I'll say, somebody tell me where you'll spend 70% more than you need to because you like the experience. By the way, I'll never forget when I said that at the Climbing Wall Summit, and when a climber raised their hand, they were like, "Craft beer." And I was like, feels very climbing wall of an answer. I'm like, you're right. You could get drunk on Bud Light for $2, but I want craft beer looks better on Instagram and it's cooler and it does taste better. But so there's that. And then to Marissa's point, planned interactions. The other thing to think about too is if you are newer and you are worried about time, you could say, please hold all questions to the end and then really control that. And timing matters as well. So if you've got a 30-minute session, you're probably not going to have time for a lot of interaction. If you've got a 90-minute session, I would specifically plan activities to help fill those 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And, like I shared earlier, at the end of the day, sometimes I do like silly things because I'm a first grade teacher by background. I have, people stand up or we may do stretches because you're going to see in people's faces if they're starting to get tired and whatever. So read the room a little bit and see how people are interacting. And if you take a couple minutes to have someone stand up and introduce themselves and share what's your favorite climb that you've ever done, or just give people a chance to shake it out. That's a great question though, Garnet. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Oh, one other little follow for you because you mentioned it, Chris. So if you get that person who's just rambling on, any hot tips for how to kind of talk over them or stop them and redirect?
Yeah. We had that on a panel last Friday at an event in San Francisco, and the woman who was moderating the panel said, you know what, let's do this. Let me spend a few minutes chatting with you afterwards, and I totally appreciate your input and your feedback, but we do want to make sure we get through all the material. So she just said it in a very polite way and said, I'll be happy to follow up with you after this. But, great thoughts, great question. By the way, it was a terrible question, and it didn't even make much sense in this particular case. But
either way, you're going to acknowledge that, say, you know what, and you've done this in Zoom meetings before, like, let's take this offline, or, let's do this after, because I want to make sure I get through the material. That's such a good excuse for that. So.
Yes. Great. Marisa has someone knocking on the window. So moving on to creation. Now we've got the content organized. And again, we love our template. It's basically what we use all the time. Take the parts that you like and the parts that make sense, and start just implement your own flow, because you want to be comfortable with the flow. So with creation, now it's how do we take all that content and make it into a visual display that we're able to present to really engage audience. So this is sort of the visual part of it. This is your slide deck and everything that applies to that. But again, I'll say it simply. People know when there's a bad slide, and it does decrease professionalism. Like when you see horribly designed slides, I don't care how great the info is. And we'll show you an example in a minute from the guy we told not to suck. And you see how he would have sucked if we didn't coach him through it. But even subconsciously, people, if the slides are clean and they're nice, people will leave just, this was a great presentation, as opposed to trying to read cluttered, those sort of things. So both conscious and subconscious, a great deck is there to support your message and to create a really great experience.
There's always the unintentional message that a busy deck or a not well-crafted deck will do. So we want to make sure that we're conscious about that. So Chris and I will often create an outline, like in Word or whatever. We'll have all our content, and people go about their creative process differently. So that's just how we go about it. And then we start to storyboard, like, either you'll do it right in your PowerPoint or on a piece of paper, like, where am I going to put this? So specifically, very simple templates that are not distracting, that don't have a lot of clutter, are really nice. And one of the tendencies that we want to make sure that we don't do is put all the information that you're going to do on a slide. Like the keynote we were just at 2 days ago had a lot of words that he read. And so your goal is to put the keywords to help you remember the longer point, but don't put the whole longer point on there, because that's going to be distracting, and you don't want to be reading your slides to people. That's not what you're there. You're there to illustrate and make it more essential. And then silly things like, not all of us are graphic designers, but there's things that are known, like you want to have fonts that are very clean, that don't have a lot of cursive or things like that. 28 points is the minimal number that you want to have for the words on a slide, because that's the easiest to read. So you have to think about that. And then
really quick on the minimal text, I just thought of this. So if you do have important things, especially in climbing where there's a lot of risk and there's some complexities and you need these words, do it as long as it needs to be, and then throw it in Chat GPT and say, I need these to be 5 bullets on a slide, condense them to 1 sentence, bullet points that will help me remember, and we'll get the point across to the audience. So, use chat. If you're coming up with way too much text, just use chat to shrink it for you.
Yeah, great point. Such a good tool. And then think about the images that you're using. So we use Canva and we have a ton of images that we can get straight from Canva that we can use to help illustrate our points. There are some proprietary things. You shouldn't be screenshotting off the internet to use in your presentations. That's usually not allowed. So be thinking about using your own images from your gyms. What was that?
I was thinking, so when we first presented in climbing, I had a bunch of stock photos, and somebody came up to me afterwards and they were like, "Hey, I liked your presentation a lot, but I didn't see any dirt bags in there." And at the time, I was brand new to climbing, so I didn't know what a dirt bag was. And I was like, "Of course not. Why would I ever put a dirt bag in there?" He's like, "No, that's a real climber, like a dirt bag climber." And he's like, "Those were all stock photos." And I'm like, "You're right. Will you send me photos from your facility?" He goes, "Absolutely." So now I've had like 4 or 5 different organizations send us real pictures from their facility that we use in presentations, which is really cool because we have permission and it's just, more authentic.
Yeah, that is always funny. He'll play a game that says stock or real. And he'll ask the audience, what do you think? And people always know, like, oh, that's real, that's a stock image. So that's pretty funny. The other thing is just like a little thing is like, stay away from all the crazy animations and transitions. Like, it's fun. And for some people, they get really into that and a different transition between each slide and different animations. But again, that's really distracting. Animating point by point does help you deliver a message in a clear and concise way, but don't go too crazy with all the different ways to go about it. And then think about not having too many slides. So a general rule is 40 slides per hour, depending on how fast you talk.
I learned something today.
What is funny is it depends on your style. We have a lot of slides that are like, here's a slide to show an example so we can go through them quickly. If you're speaking a lot, think about 3 minutes per slide if you're really explaining things. So a couple different ways to look at that.
And kind of going back to that original flow where we had the where we talk about how you teach a key, and we say, like on this one, we said, what is it? Why, why is it important? Now here's how you do it. And we talked about reinforcing with stories and examples. So this next slide, so this was the slide that the Do Not Suck guy, Jacob, sent to us. He's like, what do you think? And we're like, I mean, we're like, that is just, you can't read it. The words are on top of other texts. So it's like hard to see in general. Too many words. It's over the logo. I mean, there's just nothing about this slide.
I mean, he had great points,
Right.
but it would be hard for an audience
Yeah.
to get his message. And that's the whole point. This is an important message. So how we can present it on a slide so that your message is actually received.
Right. And imagine if this was up there, you'd be interested in it. So you'd be staring at there, trying to read and figure it out. You'd lose all attention on the speaker. And then it's hard sometimes as a speaker to get the people back. So after redoing this slide, it became this, a nice clean image, only the most important words on there. And it just made more sense. This was more aesthetically pleasing, easy to understand. And this supported his presentation instead of distracting from his presentation.
So he could talk about each point. He just didn't need to write it out entirely. So he could, and if people had questions, which they did, he could elaborate on that, but it's a much cleaner way to convey what he was trying to show.
Yes. So any questions about the creation of your content?
All right.
By the way, only on a climbing wall webinar would somebody actually be climbing during the webinar. Like that's how dedicated and passionate climbing professionals are.
All right. So communication, it's, how you're conveying the information. So we've talked about what you're going to say, and then we talked about how you're going to put it on slides. And now it's like the things that you say to make sure that you convey the information in the way you want to. And that's really how you deliver the message, the things that you say. But what Chris said earlier is really, it doesn't matter what you think you're saying. It's how people are receiving that information. So there are little tricks that we've learned along the way for how you communicate that message that are going to help you deliver it in the way that people receive it well.
And this goes back to the fact that I'm sure you've seen presenters who are stuck behind the podium the whole time and just kind of standing on the podium, maybe looking down at notes. And no matter how good the info is, you never leave going, that was fantastic, right? You're like, I think I learned a few good things, but it wasn't memorable. It didn't resonate. It didn't prompt me to be inspired to take action. So, and by the way, that's not to say if your comfort zone is behind a podium, you can still be back there with great nonverbal body language. So if you are going to be behind a podium, I move all over the place, as you could probably guess, even from a Zoom. Like it's hard for me not to even like stay in frame. But you know, the basics, and it's most basic: shoulders back, eye contact with the audience, like good posture, just very open, right? That's the basic. If I could give a person one advice, would be that. But with body language, again, a lot is subconscious. I don't know that anyone would ever leave one of Jake's sessions going, oh man, his posture was terrible. Like it was just, but they would leave just, it wasn't as good of an experience. It's this subconscious perception. But with nonverbal, again, you try to move, engage with the entire audience. If you're newer and you're nervous, sometimes you do pick a couple of smiling faces in the audience and that helps you through the presentation. But, you know, as you get more seasoned, the more you can interact, the better experience it is for everybody. So that great body language. And then it gets even more specific as you get better. When you're emphasizing points, like I guarantee you the photo right there, he's talking about something really important because he's like, oh man. But people's brains, if I were to talk about, like you said, 95% of people never been into a climbing gym.
And I made that up.
Totally made up stat. So we're hoping it's way more than that. But if I were to say that, you know, 95% of people have never been in a climbing gym. But if I were to go, 95% of people have never been in a climbing gym, that is such a small percentage of people that actually know what we do. Just talking about large with your hands and then small with your hands creates a more impactful message, right? So we're going to keep that in mind. Body language is so important. It's 70% of communication.
Just a second. So one of the things that I just saw in a video was talking about men have a tendency to put their hands in their pockets when they're speaking, and that's like a nervous habit. Women have a tendency to either clasp their hands in front of them or behind them. So we don't always know what we're doing with our hands, especially if we're new to presenting. So when you practice, maybe you record yourself or maybe you think about that. And what they said, someone once said, like, think about holding a paper clip in your hand. That's one thing that you can do when you're making points. Did you ever see that?
No.
Oh yeah. So that's, I mean, that's just like little tricks of the trade. And what Chris said as he was demonstrating, right? All the points that he was making. So again, something to keep in the back of your mind. Don't freak out about like, oh my gosh, what am I doing with my body? Because when you're comfortable with your message, you don't have to worry about that. Just remember not to like speak like this or hide behind a podium or put your hands in your pockets, that kind of stuff.
And Molly, we didn't mention this part of my background. You know, Garnet and Jake both know, but I used to do stunts for the kids show Power Rangers. So body language for me is easy because we wore a helmet with a face that was covered and we weren't allowed to talk. So everything was body language. Yes. So for me, that part's always been pretty easy. Then there's the verbal piece. And with the verbal piece, it's just making sure that you enunciate well. I'm notorious for talking too quickly. But when you talk too quickly, you tend to stumble over words. So just being aware of speaking at a pace, at the right tone. And again, when you can get to, have a very good tone, use a microphone when it's provided. And sometimes I'm guilty of it. I'm like, I don't like wearing microphones, but if people in the back can't hear you, then your message doesn't get heard. It doesn't resonate. So, wear the microphone if it's provided. Those sort of things are important. Pausing sometimes and repeating important points can also drive something home. So in your session, when they have got to remember this. They've got to remember this. Like if I wanted to make sure that everybody remembered that nonverbal, your body language is 70% of communication, that is something that I would probably say twice, right? If that's something I really want people to take home, I would say, 70% of your communication is body language. Think about that. 70% of your communication is your body language, which is why you have to be aware of it. Right. So just things like that, pacing, using the correct words. Here I'm going, don't go, figure out what your nervous words are or whatever, and don't use those. Again, that helps with you when you record it. You can see sometimes the little things that we may say or do that we might want to work on. Interaction. We did have it in there. Garnet, you ruined it. It was right here. No, but you do want to, interaction, again, making sure it's specific and relevant to what you're presenting. As we mentioned earlier, some is the planned interaction and some is just, when there's a question or a thought, or ask for thoughts. By the way, a side note too, is sometimes what we'll do when we present is I might come out to give people who have more experience credit right out of the gate. So they're more receptive. Because some people, I've been in climbing for 40 years. I'm sitting in here anyway. But to give them credit, what we'll do is I'll say, how many of you have been in, and this is interaction, how many of you have been in the industry for under a year, brand new, and you see like, you know, a certain amount of hands go up and you say, oh my gosh, this is going to change your game. You're going to love this. It's going to be all new information. How many of you are like that, you know, 5, 6, 7 years? And then your hands go up like, you know what? You're going to learn a few new things, but there's going to be some things you're reminded of, right? You're going to be like, we got to get back to doing that. And how many of you have been in here, you're veterans, like 10 plus years? Those hands go up. They go from here. So they're sitting in the back, right? The 10-year vets. And then they're like, and you're like, all right, when we go through some of these topics, you're going to have a lot of experience and a lot of thoughts you're going to be able to add. So please feel free to add your experience and your thoughts when we get to these important points, because you have so much value to add. So that's a good way to disarm an audience too, especially if you're a little bit nervous about the audience and the people with experience. Timing. This is a huge pet peeve of mine. And we've worked really hard on this, but you start when you're supposed to start and you end when you're supposed to end, and make sure that all your content fits properly into that time. So often you either lose the back end of your presentation because you're trying to end on time and now you're rushing through it and you're going really fast and you're just click, slide, slide, slide. And then people don't get the benefit of that. That's why we switch to generally 3 teaching points, because that you can generally do in 45 minutes to an hour. So make sure your content fits the time allotted, that you don't have to rush, and that you end on time. We actually have 2 good friends of ours that are very esteemed speakers in commercial fitness. And they both say, you know what we do on purpose? We add a bunch of extra slides as like a teaser. So people think I didn't get that. I'm like, that would annoy the heck out of me if I was like, I didn't get this, but then they're great speakers and that's their tactic. No, your presentation should have a beginning, the content, and an end, and people should leave feeling like I got this information and I can act on it, right? So make sure that timing.
And on the flip side, I think we were seeing, you know, ending early leaves people like, wait, that's it? That's all I got? So, you know, if it's an hour presentation and at 30 minutes you're wrapping up, people feel like they didn't get all, we were supposed to be here for an hour. So really, practicing can be hard for some people. They don't like to role play, but it will help you with the pacing of the content. And, you know, for those of you who've been speaking forever, that's something that you got. But as you're just getting started, that timing is going to be really important.
Yeah, and you can set up a little timer. Like there's apps for your phone, and especially if we've done a presentation a lot, we don't generally need the timer because we've done it a ton. But a new presentation, I'll put the little timer, I'll hit go when we start, and I kind of keep my eyes and I know where I should be sort of during that time. But you can do that where the audience won't even see it, and that helps keep you on pace. Authenticity, and this is crucial. If you're funny, tell jokes. If you're not, don't. If you're academic, be academic. Just be yourself. There's nothing more endearing than when someone's themselves. Back to don't suck guy. When we worked with him, he was like, I'm so nervous. And he's a great guy. He's not the most polished speaker, but he's a great guy and a great operator. And we're like, tell the audience from the start, be like, this is my first presentation. I'm so excited. I worked really hard on this content and I'm a little nervous. You know, like just be authentic, be honest. That's endearing to an audience. Don't try to be somebody you're not. Just be yourself. And then, you know, practice, as Marisa said, practice, practice, practice. The more seasoned you get, and Molly, we have no idea how many times you've presented. If you're newer, you practice, practice, practice. If you've been doing it forever, yeah, practice, right? But you know, that's the best way to improve.
All right. So, any questions as far as communication and verbal delivery? All right, then we just have a couple best practices that we found along the way. One is try to get to your room early. If there's a session right before you, try to get there at the very end of that session so that you can get everything connected. We found sometimes it can be really stressful if you're running in late and sometimes the connections don't work for some reason or your sound isn't working. So the earliest you can get in there, even if, let's say you're first thing in the morning on Thursday, go the day before into the room and just look at the setup and make sure it works. If you have time at the lunch break and there's an hour where no one's in the room, just go test out the connections. We've been doing that for years because that just gets one of those things that you don't need to be stressed about. I feel sorry for the AV guys when everyone is like 5 minutes before the session start and they're running around like crazy and people are like, oh, my clicker doesn't work, my sound doesn't work. So the earlier you can do.
And find the AV guys. Because like we were just in Utah and we had a connection issue. So when you go in, there's generally, and some like conference centers will have a bunch. Others will have one poor soul running around trying to help every single room. So make sure you find out where they are just in case you do have an issue. And by the way, this is like be safe stuff. Generally, it just works, right? I mean, 90% of the time we plug in, everything works fine. But, you know, just in case, again, to eliminate some stress.
So I know that Jake and Garnet have told all of you, but you're gonna bring your own laptop, you're gonna have your own clicker. We always have an adapter. I have a PC, Chris has a Mac, but we have adapters and different ways for ports to, little things that are gonna help take the stress out of finding the right thing. There's easy links to adapters. If you're not sure what we're talking about, they're like $14 on Amazon. Just reach out to us on email and we'll send you. It just makes your life a lot easier. And that way you're not worried about where to put the HDMI cord, all that stuff. This is something that someone told us a long time ago and it never dawned on me. So I have my presentation on my PowerPoint. I go to present and then something has happened to my computer, like luck would have it that it goes out. So if you could back it up to a hard drive somewhere else or put it in a cloud somewhere where you can easily access, put it on a flash drive. I know we were what, like 2 weeks ago or a week ago, CWA has our slides. So they're going to have a backup too, but just make sure that it's not only in one place because that's just going to ask for something back.
And somebody, I think it might have been when we did this a few years ago with another presenter from CWA, he said, I actually print out my slides and I have them in front of me just in case everything goes south. At least I can have my slides in front of me to convey the message to the audience. So,
and you never know, like we had an issue at the Utah conference not that long ago, not in Salt Lake and St. George, but there was something wrong with the screen. And so they had to take everything down in the middle of my presentation. So if I had the slides where I could just remember, oh, here's what we're talking about. And it ended up working fine. It was just like 5 minutes, but I knew my content well enough that I wasn't struggling. But if you had that in front of you, you could say, let me talk to you about, route setting and some new ideas. And you could just look at your slide and talk about it until they get it done. So the other thing is and Jake, you know better, but sometimes the internet doesn't work in the conference room. Like if you're relying on pulling something from YouTube or just the other day I had to do a Canva presentation and I couldn't get the internet to work. So I had to hotspot it from my phone. People were watching. It was a little bit of a stressful situation. So don't rely on it. It's better to just have everything down and if you need it, great. And then one of the things that we found, especially if you're new or nervous, is engage with people as they're walking in the room. So you're walking around and you're introducing yourself like, hey, Garnet, where you're from? Oh, great. What brings you to the conference? How many? Just like interact with people and get to know them. I've seen people who are super nervous and they're pacing behind the scenes or maybe they're getting prepped. But I think when you start to build relationships with the people in your audience and you have friendly faces, like if you have your people from your team that are with you and they come to the presentation, you want to look at those friendly faces and smile with them. So getting to know people is really great. And then asking them, like, oh, what are you hoping to get out of this? Because then you could say, oh, when I was interacting with Jake at the beginning, he said he really was wanting to get his team leveled up in such and such. So that's something that's going to be fun. And Chris said that about the authenticity. It's just do your best to relax and have fun and just enjoy the moment, especially for people who are new to speaking. Take some time to soak it in. Like, this is my first time at CWA. I'm so excited to be here. I'm grateful. And, thank your audience. Like, thank you for sharing your time with me. We really appreciate it.
And the part about having fun is you were selected for a reason because Climbing Wall believe in you, your ability, your topic, your description, your background, all of that. One of the first times I ever presented was an executive wellness session for Merrill Lynch executives. So like super high end. I was so scared, like the sweaty pits down to my hips, like it was, just shaky clicker. And I remember thinking right before I started, that was all before I even started. But I was like, I can't wait for this to be over. I can't wait for this to be over. And I had that light bulb moment where I was like, what's wrong with you? What do you mean you can't wait for this to be over? You've prepared for this. You're the expert. You've got this information. Now you get to share it with a group of people who need to hear it. And that was really like that mindful moment where I was like, so just, relax, be yourself and have fun. So, just to recap really quickly, you want to create great content. And the most important thing is that it's organized in a format that people can remember. Again, sometimes as experts, we understand it. So we talk about it the way we understand it, but people remember kind of in the way we told you, then, create a nice slide deck that just supports the communication, doesn't take over your communication, and also looks very professional. And then, we talked about how to communicate it, great body language, tone, pacing, have fun, be yourself, all of those great things. And if you do all that, oh, see, Molly, there's a presentation I did. Now you see the Power Rangers. But you'll have a powerful presentation that resonates. But I think what's more important, and this is why it's so awesome to be selected as a speaker, is what you end up doing is you help the climbing industry grow. Every single thing you share in your session is going to help somebody or multiple people run their gyms better. And that's what the Climbing Wall Association and the Climbing Wall Summit is all about. So we get to help this incredible industry grow. So thank you. Here's all of our contact info. So Molly, if you come up against things, or anybody else who's watching the recording of this, if you have questions, we sincerely mean it. Reach out. We're happy to help if we can. Yeah, and thank you.
Mhm.